how would I do it? How would I adapt the story of Helm Hammerhand? We've just had the War of the Rohirrim, and if you haven't seen our review on it yet, then please go and check that out. But a bit of a spoiler here, to say it nicely, I didn't find it the best film ever. But if I'm going to say these things, I thought it could be fun to actually tell you how perhaps I would do it if it was all down to me. So, I've sat down, mapped out a vision for what I believe could be the ultimate adaptation for Helm Hammerhand's tale. Admittedly, I've done this in an evening rather than over a few years, but let's see how I compare.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Let's start by focusing on the characters and their roles in this adaptation. After all, an adaptation of Helm Hammerhand's tale needs to strike a delicate balance. It's got to stay true to Tolkien's rich lore while making the story accessible and emotionally resonant for a modern audience. Now, that may not be everyone's favourite thing to hear, but at the end of the day, the people who watch the film have to connect with it. And the characters are the heart of the story. They serve as the driving force behind the narrative's tensions, stakes, and eventual resolution. So let's explore who they are and the tone that this adaptation would aim to achieve. Now, of course, we have to start at the core of the story, Helm Hammerhand, the Ninth King of Rohan. He is described in the story as a grim, stoic figure, a leader weighed down by the burdens of his people and his own personal flaws. Helm's physical strength and fierce loyalty are legendary, but his temper and pride often drive him to decisions that come with great cost. Helm represents the Old Guard, a steadfast warrior king who embodies Rohan's strength, but whose methods and mindset are beginning to falter in the face of change. My adaptation leans into Helm's complexity, showing both his immense courage and the ways his stubbornness and anger contribute to the tragedies that unfold. His unyielding nature makes him a compelling yet tragic hero, whose journey is as much about his personal redemption as it is about Rohan's survival. And then we have Freca, who is going to be far more important in my version. Helm's nephew and the eventual successor to the throne represents hope and renewal. Unlike Helm, Freca is pragmatic and forward-thinking, a leader who values strategy over brute strength. His character arc sees him grow from a cautious and reluctant warrior into a bold and inspiring leader who is willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. Freca's bond with Helm will really add some emotional weight to the story. He respects his uncle but isn't afraid to challenge his decisions when the moment comes. This dynamic creates tension between the old and the new, as Freca's rise mirrors the passing of an era in Rohan's history. Now, let's talk about the daughter, who I'm not actually going to name Hera in this, as we'll come to in a moment. For me, the daughter of Helm that will feature in this story is called Freca. And to be fair, she will still be fairly vital to the story. Her name in my version is derived from Old English and it means peace. And this was done to align with Tolkien's linguistic framework for Rohan. It reflects her role as a bridge between warring factions and her desire to preserve her people's future. Freca's inclusion is pivotal for me because her rejection of Wolf's proposal is the inciting event that sets the story in motion. However, her role extends far beyond that moment. Freca is a compassionate character who grows into a leader in her own right. She represents the resilience of Rohan's people and the strength that comes with unity and hope. But unlike her brothers, who represent Rohan's warrior tradition, Freca provides a perspective grounded in care for the common folk and the preservation of their culture. This balance makes her fully realize the indispensable part of the narrative. And the decision to rename her Freca instead of the movie's Hera is very much deliberate. While Hera is a name tied to Greek mythology, Freca to me fits more perfectly into Tolkien's world, adhering to his closer focus on Anglo-Saxon and Old English naming conventions. To me, Hera stuck out a bit as a name. Freca fits a bit better. Now as we continue, we do have Helm's sons, of course, Haleth and Hammer. They represent different aspects of his legacy. Haleth, the elder, mirrors his father's stern and disciplined nature. He is a capable warrior and Helm's most trusted advisor. His death in the early stages of the war at the hands of Wolf is a devastating loss that symbolizes the cost of Helm's pride. And then we have Hammer, the younger son. He is more impulsive and idealistic. His tragic end during the failed sortie adds to the mounting despair of the siege. These characters provide personal stakes for Helm and Freca, I guess as well, grounding the larger conflict in intimate familial loss. Now we move on to Wolf. the son of Freca, and he will be the primary antagonist for my version. Being ambitious, cunning, and driven by revenge, Wulf's claim to Rohan is built on both personal and political grievances. His hatred for Helm is deeply personal, stemming from the humiliation of his father's death and Freda's rejection. Yet Wulf will not be a one-dimensional villain. His motivation is rooted in the historical mistreatment of the Dunlendings, making him a character who is as much a product of his circumstances as his choices. Wulf's journey parallels Helm's in many ways, as both are consumed by their obsessions. And we also have his dynamic with his general Morkan, which will reveal his growing ruthlessness as the story progresses. Which, you may be wondering, who is this Morkan? Well, Morkan is the General Targ of my film. He serves as Wulf's second-in-command and the leader of the Dunlending forces during the Siege of the Hornburg. His name, rooted in the Old English elements meaning dark or black and carnage or slaughter, reflects the role he will take in this. Morkan is introduced as a loyal follower of Freca, and after Freca's death he becomes Wulf's closest advisor and enforcer. Unlike Wulf, he is emotionally driven. Morkan is cold and pragmatic, providing a stark contrast to his master. His role is crucial in making the Dunlendings a credible threat, as he spearheads the tactical assault on Rohan, including the ambush that kills Hammer. Morkan's death at the hands of Frealaf in the climactic battle provides a satisfying conclusion to his arc. And finally, as one of the characters we will more closely look at, let's have a quick glance at Freca. Freca's presence in the opening act establishes the central conflict. A powerful landowner with Dunlendish blood, Freca represents the historical tension between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings. His arrogance and ambition leads to his own downfall at Helm's hands, but his death is what sets the stage for the larger war that follows. While his role will be brief, it is very much pivotal to the story's foundation. Now, before we actually move on to the story itself, I just want to very quickly touch upon the tone of this. Obviously, the War of the Rohirrim was animated, and I don't think I would go for this route after seeing how they did it. The tone for my adaptation would be somber and introspective. Maybe think of stories like Logan or Gladiator. It's a story of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, exploring themes of pride, vengeance, and the cost of leadership. While the action sequences, such as Helm's nighttime raids and the climactic battles, will provide thrilling set pieces, the emotional core lies in the characters' struggles to uphold their values in a world on the brink of collapse. By embracing the complexities of Tolkien's lore and infusing the narrative with rich character development, this adaptation would offer a fresh yet faithful exploration of Rohan's darkest hour. So, before we dive into the narrative itself now, as that's probably why a lot of you are really, truly here, let's quickly touch upon what a 3-act structure is for those to understand what I'm going to go into. In storytelling, the 3-act structure is a classic framework used to organize a story into 3 sections. We get the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. It's basically a way to ensure the story builds momentum, escalates stakes, and provides a satisfying payoff. For Helm Hammerhand's story, this structure works beautifully because it mirrors the rise, the fall, and the eventual redemption of Rohan during its darkest hour. So, with that covered and us all on the same page, let's break down the story. So, we have Act 1. We would open in Edoras during a time of uneasy peace. Helm Hammerhand is introduced as a grim and stoic king, a man revered for his strength but prone to moments of explosive anger. He has 3 children, Haleth, Hammer, and Freda, and these are established alongside his nephew Frealaf, who provides a contrast to Helm's hardened demeanour. While Helm is proud and unyielding, Frealaf is pragmatic and thoughtful, though unsure of himself as a leader because he's always playing the understudy to Haleth and Hammer. Freca, a powerful landowner with Dunlendish blood, arrives in Edoras with his son Wulf and his general Morkan. Freca proposes a political marriage between Wulf and Freda to unite their bloodlines. Freda, very visibly uncomfortable, shares a little look with Helm, but Helm is the one who already knows what he's going to say and outright rejects the proposal, mocking Freca's girth and ambitions in front of the court. Helm's scorn is deeply personal, rooted in his mistrust of Freca's Dunlendish heritage and his knowledge of Freca's ambitions. Enraged, Freca insults Helm in council, and the confrontation spills outside. Helm, with a single blow, kills Freca, earning him that nickname of Hammerhand. Wulf and Morkan swear vengeance, retreating to Dunland to gather their forces. As the repercussions of Helm's actions unfold, the tension in Edoras rises. Haleth and Hammer push Helm to prepare for war, while Frealaf actually advises caution, urging the king to seek aid from Gondor instead. Helm's pride blinds him to the growing danger, and he stubbornly refuses to act beyond fortifying Edoras. Freca, caught between her loyalty to her father and her desire to protect her people, begins taking a more active role in organising supplies and bolstering morale among the common folk. Wulf, now the self-proclaimed leader of the Dunlendings, begins his campaign against Rohan. It is Morkan who's leading these attacks, and Helm's forces meet the Dunlendings at the Fords of Eisen, where Haleth fights valiantly but gets killed by Wulf in single combat, albeit in a cowardly way. Freca and Hammer barely manage to retreat themselves, returning to Edoras with grim news. Overwhelmed, Helm orders the evacuation of Edoras to the Hornburg, where the people of Rohan take refuge. This is where we now move on to Act 2, the Siege of the Hornburg. The Hornburg becomes the centerpiece of the second act, with the bitter cold of the long winter setting the tone for the siege. Wulf, cowardly and cunning, takes his seat in Medu's Seld within Edoras and declares himself the new king of Rohan, while sending Morkan to lead the assault on the Hornburg. The fortress holds strong as Helm's men defend the walls with great resolve. Freca takes on an increasingly prominent role, helping to organise the food supplies and caring for wounded, basically becoming a bit of a source of hope for the everyday people. Tensions rise though within the fortress. Helm, already burdened by Haleth's death, becomes increasingly gaunt and consumed by grief. When Hammer leads a foraging party to secure supplies, along with Freca and a few others, Morkan ambushes them, killing Hammer. Freca narrowly escapes and flees into the mountains, where he will eventually find shelter at Dunharrow. Helm is shown Hammer's dead body, and with no sign of Freca either, assumes they are now both dead, deepening his guilt and despair. Meanwhile, the Dunlendings grow restless, as now with his grief, Helm clads himself in white and appears like a ghost in the snow and begins his legendary night raids. His horn echoes through the deep, and the Dunlendings whisper of a snow troll, a creature, a wraith, a ghost, something that no weapon can harm. These raids demoralize the enemy, but they also take their toll on Helm. He grows weaker and weaker with each sortie. Morkan, getting increasingly frustrated by the stalemate, devises a plan to draw the defenders out without breaching the fortress walls. He debates building siege towers, but realizes starvation is the way to go. Inside the Hornburg, Freca rallies the people even more, giving them hope even as supplies dwindle. She begins to feel that Freca may still be alive, but Helm dismisses her optimism, convinced all the men of his line are lost. As the siege nears its breaking point, Helm ventures out one final time, blowing his horn and charging into the enemy camp. He slays many, but his body is later found frozen upright in the snow, his knees unbent, the symbol of unyielding defiance. One last act for the warrior king, one last moment of inspiration for his people. This is where we now hit Act 3 and the restoration of Rohan. The third act will begin with the people of Rohan on the brink of despair. Helm is now dead, his sons gone, his nephew disappeared, and the Hornburg defenders preparing for one final stand. Freca steps into the leadership role here, organising the remaining soldiers and civilians to hold out just for as long as they can. Her resolve inspires those around her, but the situation appears hopeless. She has no true plan. She can't lead them into war, but she can keep their hopes alive for now. This is where we now see Freca once again, having gathered scattered Rohirrim forces in the mountains, and with his wounds healed enough at this time, he learns of the dire situation still at the Hornburg. With winter now beginning to thaw, he sees it as his moment, his last chance to save who's left. He leads a desperate charge to relieve the fortress, with a small amount of reinforcements that have come from Gondor. It is now or never. Meanwhile, Freca devises a plan to sabotage Morkan's siege towers, leading a small group of defenders in a daring nighttime raid, inspired by the actions of Helm. The attack delays the enemy and buys time for Freca's forces to arrive. The final battle here is a spectacle of chaos and bravery. Morkan leads his forces into the Coombe, only to be flanked by Freca's riders. The Dunlendings are caught off guard, and the tide turns in Rohan's favour. Freca confronts Morkan and distracts him long enough for Freca to make his move, and he slays Morkan, gaining his revenge. But there is no time to rest. Wulf still sits in Edoras. With the Dunlendings defeated, the warriors of Rohan ride back to Edoras. and as Wulf sees them approach, he attempts to escape, but he cannot get past the walls. He runs to Meduseld. He attempts to hide, but all he does here is corner himself. Freylaf and Wulf face off in a climactic duel, and Freylaf emerges victorious. The Dunlendings are routed. Rohan is saved, but the cost is heavy. The film ends with the burial of Helm and his sons in the royal mounds, the white flowers beginning to bloom. Freylaf is crowned king, and Freda steps back, recognizing that her role is to rebuild rather than rule. The final scene shows the people of Rohan beginning to heal, their resilience shining through even in the face of overwhelming loss. And so, there we have it. This is how I feel the vision for how Helm Hammerhand's story should be brought to life on the big screen, by staying faithful to Tolkien's original lore while making careful, thoughtful adjustments for modern storytelling. This is the kind of adaptation that I would like to see myself. At its heart, the story does remain about legacy, sacrifice, and the resilience of a people. Helm stands as that towering figure, both literally and symbolically, embodying the spirit of what those Rohirrim soldiers hold. Yet it is his pride and nature bringing tragedy to his family and his kingdom, and this is what paves the way for Freylaf to lead Rohan into a new era that it needs. Of course, I have included Freda myself, as it does help add some emotional depth for the story, showing us the struggles and strength for those who are often overlooked in such epic tales. It's to keep the story seeming epic, but yet also grounded in reality. And with the addition of Morkan as well, Wulf's second in command, we can make sure Wulf stays as that somewhat cowardly leader he is, but still have an antagonist that we can truly hate on the battlefield. It gives us that chance to ensure the bad guys feel as developed and compelling as our protagonists. The tone I'd go for is of course somber yet hopeful, reflecting the dark times of the Long Winter, but also enduring the strength of the Rohirrim. Those themes of vengeance, redemption, and the cost of leadership permeate the narrative, creating a film that feels grounded in Tolkien's world while connecting it with modern audiences to that certain level. Ultimately, this adaptation would do its best to honour Tolkien's vision by embracing those Anglo-Saxon roots of Rohan and crafting a character-driven story of survival and heroism. By focusing on richly developed characters like Helm, Freylaf, and potentially Freda as well, and by capturing the raw beauty of the harshness of Rohan during its darkest hour, I've aimed to create a cinematic experience that both longtime fans and newcomers can both appreciate. And with that now, it is time for my question of the day, which is, what do you think of this vision for adapting Helm Hammerhand's tale? What would you tweak to it? And does it sound like a version of the film you would like to see? Let me know your thoughts and opinions, and be as brutal as you want down in the comment section below. And now it is time to give a massive thank you to our patrons who continue to support the channel. You are all amazing. And if you have reached the very end of this video with me today and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It would massively help us out. And why not drop a like on the video as well? And with that, all I can say is, thank you for spending just some of your time with me today, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.